Morning, morning, monsters. So we're talking about lobbies again, and this is the penultimate in the lobby series. Oh dear. We're going to talk about soft lobbies, sometimes called invisible lobbies, sometimes called world lobbies, bunch of different names for it. So, what distinguishes this kind of lobby design from the other stuff we've spoken about? And if you've missed it, we've already covered why matchmaking is slow, why matchmaking happens the way it does, sort of the patterns behind that. We've discussed the traditional lobby format, why that leads to toxicity, and we've discussed the wait and play or watch and wait systems for lobby matchmaking. So this is a whole different approach. The soft lobby has a few caveats. First of all, we assume that you have a live world. Then we also assume that you have soft entrance content, is what I'll call it. I can't recall a better name for it. Soft entrance content, and we assume that you have, I'm just going to say servers, fuck ton of servers, because to do this approach we do need a lot of servers. I really should just sort of smash something here so we can get some white in the background there to make that a bit more viewable. We're working on it. Let's just adjust that. There we go. Right, so what do I mean by live world? Well, probably the best example of this soft matchmaking is Destiny. That's probably one of the best examples, but one of the most traditional examples is MMOs as well. So the one of the problems you have, as we said, with MMOs and with servers and matchmaking is you have latency and the problems of physics, right? So quite early on in MMO tech, partly because they couldn't deal with too many loads, and partly because you wanted to keep players in the same rough geography together, there was a concept of sharding. Now, in a world where a lot of people don't want to necessarily commit to that, where you want to deliver servers that have, frankly, lower costs, what you've got is you've got the soft MMO or you've got the living world MMO. And probably the best and most notable first example of this is Destiny. So how does soft matchmaking work? Well, soft matchmaking can also be called geo matchmaking or a bunch of other things. But it basically assumes that we have a hub which is heavily sharded, right? So in Destiny, that's the tower, right? So massively sharded. And we don't actually care about matchmaking you in the tower. We just throw you in with randos as quickly as we can. And we give you a sense that the world is alive. The moment anyone has any kind of latency issues, any kind of NAT issues, any basic kind of thing, we get rid of them from your game because it's not super important, because the chances of you being engaged with them, not super high. It's fine. This is basically a trash matchmaking environment. And that's okay, because it's about giving a sense of life. Now, obviously, if you have friends and other things, there's things that we can use to enforce it, like, oh shit, these two players are friends, or they're in the same party or quest group. So that's a strong incentive for us to keep them together, but that's quite easy because it's matchmaking. The bigger problem in an Anthem or a Destiny style game is these players will then go out into a world map, and the world map will often be shared between multiple different levels and blah 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 blah, and we can do best effort matchmaking as they wander around the world map. So let's say that there's a few entrance or drop locations, and then we have some major quest hubs, right, that they're traveling to for reasons. And we put a lot of quest content and we put a lot of repeatable content in the area. So we expect these people to multiple times go from these star locations to these quest points. Like that's just something we see a lot of going on. Then what we do is, as they're en route as they're engaging in this sort of content, in the background, we're doing this soft, constant matchmake loop where we're trying to see, hey, is anyone roughly of their level with a good connection, da 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 da. And rather than getting rid of that weight that we've talked about so many times, we're basically hiding it. We're doing it constantly all the time in the background. And if the player is not getting matchmaked, they're still engaging in the content. Because the content is the same content they intended to engage with in the first place, we don't have the problem of wait and play, because if they stick to the content, that's kind of what we intended. We're really seeing the matchmaking system here, and we're really seeing the multiplayer tools here as sort of a boost to quality. So when our concurrency is good, when our matchmaking is good, the players are more likely to engage people. And most of these games also have a sort of opt-out option. But then the other thing we'll do is we'll have a lot of latent activity. So the other day we talked about Death Stranding's desire paths and the highly latent data that's involved in there. That's one sort of system that can be put in place. Another is we can have players engage with formal structures or things that we can replicate instead of in a 4 or 8 player sort of live, highly concurrent environment. We can replicate that out to thousands or tens of thousands or even millions in some cases. So that's the core principle of soft matchmaking. Now, soft matchmaking has a lot of benefits, but it also has some issues. Probably the first issue is don't talk to strangers. And it sounds really funny, but basically this idea of not engaging with strangers, like you don't generally in soft matchmaking systems have very good reasons to engage with strangers. There's a lot of game design stuff where we'll drop down unique bosses or we'll drop down mini bosses that are pretty much impossible for you to take on solo, and we'll do this depending on how much good network activity we have. So we'll encourage people to help each other out. We'll do XP design, things like this. But we have to basically push these people together to engage because they haven't been in a matchmaking queue. They haven't explicitly sought out other people. So they might just want to be getting on with their single player thing, right? So this stranger danger, this don't talk to strangers element, is surprisingly a hard design barrier to overcome in this kind of soft matchmaking system. It's tough. Then, but you can design around it and you can get people to engage. But then the other issue you have in a soft matchmaking scenario is you have these sort of overlapping bubbles of content, and you basically have to design your content in such a way that a player that's engaged with content A can move through into content B and help the other player. This also leads to very noisy cats, apparently. He's whining because he's chonky and we're not feeding him. Anyway, so the other issue you find with this is with your quest design or your level design, you tend to put in I wouldn't say a lot of unnecessary travel, but you tend to emphasize travel and you tend to emphasize moving space. You don't want, going back to that basic map that we were talking about earlier, when a player drops there and they've got a head there, you don't drop them right there, because the whole point is you want them to move through the geography. The whole point is you want idle time in the player's experience for them to be engaged in this soft MMO stuff. So that's a tricky problem, because basically you're introducing downtime and grind, and that can be problematic. Other issues we have with soft MMOs, players drop out a whole bunch, but generally speaking, if like I'm doing a storyline like this and you're doing a storyline like this and we engage, players generally stay around. So I know I'm trying to nitpick on soft matchmaking because it does have some issues, but it really is a potent system. There is a reason why you're seeing more Destiny and Nathem style games. From the marketing standpoint, it's very easy to bluff about your concurrency numbers. It's very easy for players to feel like the game is alive and healthy. They're not seeing matchmaking queues, so they don't feel like the community's dying, because in scenarios like your hub world or your tower or whatever you're calling it, you can throw randos together even if they have poor quality connections, or they're not good to play together because there's a huge level disparity or something, or maybe there's a factional disparity if it's a PvP or a MMO game with faction systems. Allows you to sort of breathe life and show some of the activity to players. Now, why I sort of highlighted servers is, unlike traditional lobby design, unlike watch and play or play and wait, you have a huge demand on servers, because for soft matchmaking to work well like this, you have to have a lot of stun and NAT server negotiation stuff, and you have to have a lot of networking servers that are maintaining state and doing this handoff between players, doing this peer-to-peer, and you push a lot of your traffic as to peer-to-peer as soon as you can, but doing this peer-to-peer is tough, because there's just a lot of edge cases you have to deal with in a soft matchmaking system. Though, of the three systems that we've seen, I think soft matchmaking systems will become staple, and already are a staple. Another soft matchmaking system, by the way, in a totally different approach as we move off the Destiny, is the Battle Royale, the 100 game, the 100-player game. Now, why do I describe this as a soft matchmaking system? It is and it isn't. This system, requires shit tons of servers, because you do need dedicated servers to pull this off. Sorry, just go back to our original. There we go. Right. It requires a soft entrance, which in this case is the battle bus or the drop-in or the airdrop. Because if all of the 100 players in a battle royale chose to drop in the same location, your network traffic would just choke. It could not handle it. No battle royale game could handle that level of player density. You would start getting really severe network issues if everyone in the entrance phase decided to jump off and airdrop at the exact same time and aim for the same area. So that's what I mean by soft entrance. And as I say, servers, because without servers you can't do the 100 players. So the other thing that the 100-player battle royale model gives you is skill mismatch. And this is counterintuitive to people. You do not want to match too strongly on skill. So normally matching on skill is a really important part of matchmaking. Ironically, it's something that we only started doing around the Halo era of matchmaking. God, to think Halo's that far in the past. Oof. Anyway, Halo's considered old school now, but Halo was revolutionary in its matchmaking design. And the Halo time was when skill matching became a much bigger deal. But Battle Royale kind of chunks that idea, because you expect when you match with 100 people that there are going to be players significantly better than you and significantly worse than you. You're expecting that sort of uneven, rough experience, and I would actually argue that that provides a lot of the flavor of Battle Royale. And yeah, there's a separate discussion here that we can have about the introduction of skilled matchmaking into Battle Royale and bots and other things. And it's part of the discussion, because bots and matchmaking, I suppose that would fall under soft matchmaking systems. Where you fill empty slots with bots, but I feel like that's a tangent that we don't want to go on at the moment. So yeah, soft matchmaking with Battle Royale style games is really, really handy, because you can quickly draft your pool together. And the other huge advantage we have, remember in the first talk when we were talking about the issues of, and we've brought it up a bunch of times, we were talking about one of the big deciders on how hard your matchmaking problems are is session length, right? because if your session length is an hour plus, right, then your concurrency numbers, remember we went back and we talked about how your concurrency numbers will translate to your difficulty of matchmaking. If your concurrency numbers are really high, but your session time is an hour plus, most of your population, like 90%, 80% of your population, remember this is going to be the equation here, it's going to be a ratio of session time to matchmaking, or your queue time, because if your session's really long and your matchmaking, let's say you're really good at matchmaking, your matchmaking is only 1 minute, then you have a huge issue here, which is if you've got 1,000 concurrent players, you're only ever going to be matching a handful of them at any given time, because most of them are going to be happily in session and playing. So Battle Royale gives you two ways to solve this. The first way it gives you to solve this is when a session ends, you get a drop of a fairly large number of players. But the other thing is, even though a full game length is like 40 minutes, depending on the type of game, with PUBG being slower, Fortnite being faster, you've got players constantly bleeding from the session. And because they're bleeding from the session roughly at the same predictable rate, you can quickly insert them into games. So that's part of how you combat the session length. Even though a full game for a Battle Royale game can be quite long, most of the players are out of it within the first minute to 5-10 minutes. Like 100 to 50 is a very quick drop in a Battle Royale game, just by design. So that's an advantage. Another advantage that you have, and this sounds counterintuitive, and this comes somewhat back to our play to wait system. If you can have a minimum matchmaking time, that's a good thing. And this is not a concept I've brought up before, but when you're doing matchmaking and when you're doing queue time, let us say that you could match people in 1 second. But that's your best case. And your worst case is 10 minutes, right? And this happens. These are real numbers that I know of from a game. The best decision you can make, and this sounds really ridiculous, is you look at your analytics data and you go, where's our drop-off point for players? Like where, so you'll have a graph like this that basically goes, you've got 100% retention at 1 second, right? And here's like 10 minutes out, right? And as you go through, there'll be some cliffs in here, and then there'll be a very long tail because there's going to be some players that just hang around for ages. And if you're getting really fancy with your analytics, you'll also be looking at how many of those people complete into match, because sometimes when people finish the matchmaking queue, as we've mentioned before, they'll drop out in the lobby, which is why they'll drop out at the start of the game. So that's why like readiness and confirmation checks are important. But you'll look at this and you'll go, well, there's this window here at say 30 seconds, and then there's a window here at like a minute, right? And so what you'll go is you'll say, instead of, even though we matched a person in a second, we will keep people in the matchmaking queue for a minimum of 30 seconds because we've determined that's what people's tolerance roughly is. And because of that, keeping them in that for the minimum of 30 seconds and not presenting the final match, we may find a better match in that period, but we may also have to be able to deal with bringing in more players or less players, especially if we can get somewhat flexible on our matchmaking numbers. But yeah, it's not a hugely complicated idea or system. As I say, it's not as complicated in implementation as play and wait, and it's not got as much nuance. But I think, as I say, you have to have a live world, so it really restricts you by genre. You'd never be able to do a soft matchmaking system with a 1v1 or even like a 3v3 or even an 8v8. You're going to be in a hard situation. You have to have a soft entrance mechanic, and then you have to have servers. You have to have fairly chunky servers compared to some of our other solutions. yeah, you see it in MMOs and sharding. The hub design we spoke about there before, drop-in locations, moving to quests. You are going to introduce travel time into your game and low points to allow the soft matchmaking to occur. Stranger danger is a thing. You have to have strong designs for people to communicate and to engage. Battle royales are another way of doing soft matchmaking, because you can throw that skill match out the window, because you can throw so many players together. People have expectations there. You've got to remember about your session time with battle royales and large matchmaking pools, how you deal with that. And then finally your session sort of bleed out becomes more important. And yeah, with soft matchmaking, you don't want to hang on to the session too long. So if you're doing a Destiny style game and these players haven't engaged and they're starting to move away from each other, there's been no communication between them, they haven't shot at the same monster or any kind of tangential soft social communication, then you want to get them out of the same session and you want to start moving them along to another session as quickly as you can to find a better match. And that, monsters, is soft matchmaking. Any questions before we end the recording and we go to our live section? More popular? Yes, no, 100% matchmaking. So the question from Quietly, do you think some game types are more popular purely because of matchmaking time? 100%. We have seen quantifiable differences in player retention rates, in social communication about a game. So one of the things that it's quite hard to communicate if you've never been in a game studio, especially a larger game studio with corporate backing, is you have user research teams, you have communication teams, you have community teams, as they're often called, or your community managers. And quite often issues in matchmaking will bubble up in the community and there'll be a lot of negativity, and that's a huge factor you've got to handle and keep in balance. It's tough. It's really, really tough. Lobby design and matchmaking, especially for multiplayer games, will affect purchase decision, will affect recommendation to friends in a big way. Recommendation to friends strongly affected by the matchmaking experience, and mostly will affect retention. And retention is just huge, because not only is retention important if you've got microtransactions or a long funnel or finance path, but even if your game is a pay once game, it'll affect the liveliness of your multiplayer and how good the experience is on a day 2 or like week 2 purchaser. And many indie games have had the experience of someone go, this game's really good, but the community's kind of dead. And that basically kills the recommendation or kills the sale. We've definitely seen this. Something we haven't dealt with and we will deal with in the final part is we'll talk about social matchmaking, we'll talk about community events and sort of using human tools to drive matchmaking, rather than everything we've talked about so far is something you do when you're developing the game and something you do as part of your technical solution. The last one we will be talking about is social methods of matchmaking and how to encourage those. And we'll be doing that tomorrow, hopefully. So if there's any other questions? Keld, thank you so much. With that, we're going to end the recording and we're just going to go back to the live stream if you're watching this on YouTube or anywhere else on the VOD. Sorry I missed you, but you can always find us live and we have a bit of a pre and post show. So, ta-ta.